Hello, my name's David Strain. I'm a senior lecturer based down in Peninsula Medical School who's recently been appointed as a clinical academic with an honorary clinical consultant job. One of the first things I was asked to do by the academic employers was produce a job plan combining my clinical work and my academic work. The point of this short presentation is to go through some of the things that I learnt, some of the mistakes I made, and some of the hints that might make future job plans slightly easier. But the first question is, what is a job plan? Because basically I thought that it was just establishing what I do when. And as I was moving into a job that already existed, it sort of didn't seem that much sense, because all I was going to be doing was continuing the job of the person before me. What I rapidly found out, though, was the job plan is more than just covering your timetable. It also laid out the professional development plan. It laid out the things that I needed to do, and also the things that I needed in return in order to do my job adequately. So I just made a few jotting points. I jotted down what my objectives were for the job plan and what my objectives were for the next 5 years of my work. Once I'd got this list, I then started trying to, get the people together, which seems to be a lot more difficult than you'd imagine. I actually assumed that getting the person that pays me and the person that's actually getting some of my time for free together to figure out how this was going to be worked out would be relatively easy. And then once I'd sat down and had my wake-up call by trying to get the two diaries together and got my first appointment made 4 months down the line, I realised that that wasn't going to be quite the same. 4 months down the line came, and 3 days before the job planning time, it got postponed. And then again 6 months later, and eventually it was two years and 3 months before that first interview happened. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is typical in any way. However, conversations with colleagues does suggest that getting this first job plan is often the most difficult part. Mainly because everybody feels the same as we do, that we do our job, we turn up, we get paid, we go home. Therefore, why do we need to put it in paper? When we sat down to plan out the job that was going to be doing, a lot of the considerations had already taken place. The first of those was figuring out how I wanted my job to work. There are two basic options for this. One is having a regular low-level commitment to clinical work and regular research time. This gives a 50-50 type of contract, or a 30-70, 40-60, depending on how your job is arranged. The other alternative favoured by other specialties is where you can have a block time on, block time off. However, this is often dependent on having lots of like-minded colleagues who can work along a very similar process. Looking first at the low-level commitment, this works really well for certain specialties, where you can have fixed sessions where you can spend in the clinic room, or fixed sessions going in acute medicine, for example. And then when you're not with the patient, you can be devoted to your academic work. It is very hampered if you have a large inpatient commitment, because as we know, you can't do a ward round, walk away, and then forget about the ward for the next 2 days while you're trying to get your head down around a journal. Other specialties, where there is a large inpatient commitment, require a bigger commitment to the patient base. There, a block time off, time on, time off rota might be appropriate. For example, you may want to spend 4 months working on the ward, followed by 8 months worth of research. This is very dependent on having a good working relationship with the rest of the team, particularly the full-time clinicians, who may see the academic someone who swans in and then swans back off and isn't seen for 8 months. They have to accept the fact that your 4 months on the ward is a full-time commitment, but your 8 months in research is also an equally full-time commitment. It does work really well with some specialties that have interventional sessions. Gastroenterology and respiratory medicine seem to be a group that have taken this forward already. Regular commitments where they have a consultant who may work on the wards while some of their colleagues are performing the endoscopy list or having bronchoscopy lists. Similarly, geriatrics does seem to work like that, where you can have an intensive period of ward-based care followed by other times in community. And if your commitments can actually help out with this team to allow them to spend longer doing the bronchoscopies, endoscopies, or doing the community work, this can often be favourable. Now, you may wonder why I suggested 4 months on and 8 months off for a 50-50 commitment. You have to remember that during the 8 months that you're off the ward, you will still have some clinical commitments, whether they be your regular clinical governance meetings, your team meetings, or just keeping up to date with your clinical side of work. And although your 4 months intensive may represent a third of your actual clinical contact time, maintaining your clinical skills over the rest of the year would turn this into a full-time 50-50 position. This is something that's termed annualisation. Within your 8 months of research time, you have to maintain your clinical skills. You also have to make sure you consider paperwork. I never realised how much paperwork was involved being a consultant. I couldn't figure out where the consultants disappeared to when they'd finished their ward rounds. Maintaining your up-to-date paperwork and having time to do that even during your research time is a very important part of your overall commitment. You also need to attend the clinical governance sessions. You need to make sure that you are still contributing to the clinical teaching and the management that goes with your department. Therefore, you have to make sure you have the SPA time. A full-time NHS clinician would have around 75% clinical, 25% SPA. This may go to an 80-20 depending on the arrangement. It tends to be seen that if you are a part-time clinician, that be 50-50, that you'd only need around 10% of the SPA time compared to your 40% clinical time. This is not the case, because unfortunately the paperwork comes in, and it comes in at a very similar rate. So although you are having less patient contact, your paperwork will not be proportionately less. One of the advantages I had by taking 2.5 years before I got my first job planning interview is I'd had lots of time to consider what could go wrong, what I'd need, and I'd had lots of time to consider the best way to bring my service development into line with the strategy of the department. One of my key objectives was to increase the visibility of the academic clinicians within our trust. We belong to a relatively new medical school, and as such we don't have the high visibility of clinical academics. Therefore, when it came to the future rounds of academic clinical fellows, the potential appointees actually didn't have the role models in place. I wanted to make sure that I had a big visibility amongst the juniors, and also that my colleagues had a similar visibility, so that when it came to the next round of applications, we not only had suitable candidates, we were, if anything, grossly oversubscribed. I wanted to make sure that I had this great interaction with the juniors by having a chance to look at my current activities, and actually when it came to the job planning interview, it was very easy and only required very subtle changes from what I was already doing. This is a huge benefit. If you attend only asking for very minor changes, particularly minor changes that don't involve or that don't have any impact on the rest of your colleagues, then you're very likely to get what you want. If, on the other hand, you go in with huge demands to have large changes, you're very unlikely to get away with that in that 1 hour time that you've got. If you want to make changes that involve others' timetables, make sure you've spoken to your colleagues before you go in. If you've got the support of the people that you're looking at changing with, it makes it a very easy job to do. Now, so far I've been saying lots and lots of what I want or what you want. That's not something we're very good at. In the health service, we're actually very used to being told what we're doing. We're very used to being given our timetable. This is your one chance for saying that you are in charge. When you sit down to have the meeting, it's really useful to have your own agenda. It's really useful to have that in a bullet point that you can hand to your supervisors, that being your clinical lead and also your academic lead. Because if there is a clear agenda laid out for them and for you, they know what to expect, you know what to expect, and then you can just discuss about how to fit in. One of the most important things is to suggest how what you're offering will fit in with both departmental objectives. Remember, you have to keep two masters happy, your clinical colleagues and your academic colleagues. You should look clearly at what the ward commitments are, what your clinic commitments are, and what your speciality commitments are. You should find out ways of bringing these all in line with one another, and you should also be realistic. There is no point saying that you can do a ward round and then walk away without having the backup. You also need to be aware what your out-of-hours duties were and make sure you've got the support to back that up. You can't do an on-call without then having the ability to follow your patients up. You then need to look further at what additional support you'll need. Do you have a secretarial staff? As an academic, you often won't have NHS secretarial support. You may not get IT support. I still don't have access to an NHS computer and the NHS network within my office. Make sure you've got appropriate SPA time and that your SPA time is clearly defined. You have your SPA time for keeping up with your clinical skills, and that you have separate research time. And the research time should be very clearly defined. You should have times where your clinical staff know that you are doing your research time, and therefore you won't get the endless calls. If you're going in there with this very firm agenda, knowing exactly what you want, you have to expect that there will be some disagreements. You have to expect the fact that some people will want more than you're offering, or that will want things under a different timetable. It will be common. In fact, to be honest, if you get through your job planning without a disagreement, then you've not asked for enough. Now, it's essential that these are resolved, but it is not necessary that they will get resolved within your 1 hour session. And you have to already go in with a plan for what to do if some of your demands, some of your agenda requirements, some of what you wish cannot be assessed. You have to have in your mind what you would like to take away from the meeting today and what you'd like to take out for the meeting over the longer term. Very often, if you can have your small concessions today, the longer term plan will fall into place, but don't get hung up on one thing that's not getting there. There are many routes to compromise. One example is to suggest the trial of job plan and then have a more urgent review for it, 3 or 6 months down the line. Similarly, there may be more pressing demands that cannot possibly be met within your job plan time, such as availability of endoscopy lists, such as the need to get an acute service established. Your commitment to setting up these services should be considered. Hopefully, at the end of your meeting, you'll have some level of agreement, or at least some level of compromise by which you can start heading towards your future job plan. Before you leave, it's very important to make sure when this job plan is going to be reviewed. If there are significant compromises, you may want to have that review done sooner rather than later. If everything's gone to plan, then approximately 12 months down the line might be a good day to review your job plan. Your job plan will be printed, it will be signed off by your lead clinician, and it will then go through to the directorate to be ratified. Ideally, this should take place within a month, and by a month you should have your nice, shiny, signed off job plan in your hand. Remember, your job plan is key to your working life. Your job plan establishes your entire career. Therefore, this is the one element that you have control over that can be responsible for your professional satisfaction.